G'day legends, I hope you are having a fantastic day and a brilliant end to your week. Now, a few people yesterday pointed out that Willie doesn't look that well. Now, I am fine, but I'm coming off a medication off the back of my chemo last week, and it's just giving me massive insomnia, so I just haven't slept much at all in a couple of days, so just bear with me. But we have 7 weeks as of today, and the treatment is over, and I cannot wait to get sort of back on my feet properly in the months following that. So thank you for sticking with me for this long 12 months. Legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. We, of course, are going to look at strikes. We have a Su-34 going down. We have a Patriot that has been targeted. We have strikes in Crimea. We need to talk about Garans and even talk about wear and tear on planes. There's a lot in that to go over today. And speaking about bits and pieces we have spoken of before, and relating that attritional war is not just tactical troops at the front line. It also goes into your manufacturing capability of planes. It goes into politics, goes into everything. It's all about pressure. Of course, we need to look at the maps, compare maps, different sources, the usual with that. But a lot of this video is going to be based around these increased tensions we are seeing in Europe at the moment, mainly in Eastern Europe. But we have drones in the sky, we have plants being blown up, we have planes violating airspaces, we have all of this, and this tension increasing as we see the US potentially backing out or potentially coming forward more. It's actually very difficult to know where is Trump sitting in all of this. But then what I want to speak about is the potential for escalation, the potential for justification, and then I want to go into something I've spoken about at length before, but it's good to have a rehash on this, is the risk of false flags. And I've been saying and have said for the last 12 months that I think we're redlining right on the risk of seeing a false flag event. Now, in the last 12 months, we haven't seen any major ones, but it doesn't mean that this isn't absolutely something that we could see. And I'm going to give you today just a brief when and why we would see these, and also a breakdown from someone behind the scenes, an expert in these fields, about what the feeling is in Europe and where BRICS may sit, where EU may sit, all of that. So there's a lot in that. That's the main bulk meat of our video today. But let's talk about strikes. So we see this, the defense of Ukraine, they tweeted out, but it was confirmed later by Mr. Fighter Bomber that Russia has lost a Su-34, that it was shot down in the Zaporizhia region. Now, I've been saying for some time that if there's any aircraft at all Ukraine needs to get on top of, it is the Su-34. It's been many, many months. It's been several months since we've actually seen the confirmed loss of a Su-34. And for the last 2 years, I've been tracking fairly closely UAC, United Aircraft Company, who build this plane, and the confirmed losses. And we see that there is a positive ratio of production versus loss. Just in the past week, we've seen a Su-35 rolled out from UAC and 2 Su-34s. That was on the 15th of September. We saw that Su-34. Yesterday was a Su-35. Now, these always, when it's released by UAC, they say a batch. Now, I don't know what a batch is. I go purely off just what I can observe, what I'm visually seeing. But even of that, which is the bare minimum we know, is we see that there's a positive rate of attrition of these planes. But that isn't the whole story. We'll go into that a little bit because there is wear and tear on airframe. But given the amount of sorties that these are doing all day, every day, the thousands of tons of FAB glide bombs that these are dropping, and the loss of one in many months, these are an incredibly efficient, effective system. To see a noticeable impact on the front line, dozens of these, not a dozen, but dozens of these would need to go down in short order. And this is what I've been saying about there needs to be real looking at how can we somehow impact the effect of these basically bomb trucks delivering unbelievably heavy artillery on target all day, all night, and incredibly accurate now as well. But this was taken down likely by a Patriot in the Zaporizhia region. But on the outskirts of Dnipro, what we see is we do see that a Patriot radar was hit by a Iskander airburst cluster munitions. We can see the cluster go off right there. And then later on in the footage, we can then see that this is heavily on fire. Now, what we do know, and you and I have spoken about this before, is you need to move these systems into range of these Su-34s. What we've spoken about is at subsonic speed, at say 30,000 feet in the air, and given the turn radius of these planes, they only remain in the targetable envelope of a system like this for an amount of seconds, a minute or just over at absolute best. But that means you need to move these systems further forward, and by moving these forward, they're going to be at more risk of being taken out as well. Now, many people are saying this is the same. It may just be coincidental, but it's worth just sharing that also. But I said that there's not the whole story about this. And I had this great conversation in here with some gentlemen on my Telegram, which you should come and join, but about that it's very easy to get these numbers of what's lost and what UAC is rolling off the manufacturing plant. What is more difficult is then the airframes being withdrawn from service due to overuse. And this is something which absolutely exists. All airframes have an amount of hours on them, and these are being used very hard. But one thing I will say is I've heard this airframe argument since the beginning of the war, that these planes are going to all be XX null and void, and that in a couple of weeks there's going to be no planes in the sky and wings are going to be falling off. It potentially could happen, and this could be a bankrupt effect like we see on the front lines, but it's also one of those things we've been hearing again and again and again. And ZM says this, but you don't know how many they are losing to wear and tear. And that is very true. We don't know that figure. But what we do know is we do know that these are delivering munitions day after day after day, every day, with very few losses, wear and tear, but also UACs pumping out. So there's a lot in that. But there's been another strike as well, which should really upset a lot of people because it was promised that this wouldn't happen again. So we see Kyiv here, and just to the north of Kyiv, just right on the border of where Belarus sits, and you can see where Belarus, Russia and Ukraine, the international borders, are likely with the drones coming out of Bryansk region, we see another training ground has been hit by missiles and drones. And this seems to happen every other week, and then it's promised that it's never going to happen again. I do not see why any of this training needs to take place in large numbers anywhere near borders. I don't really see personally why it needs to even take place within Ukraine. Why not do all of this just out across the border a couple of hours, or at least more of it? And AMK, he speaks about this footage showing 10 Garand 2 and 3 drone strikes on this training ground. Prior to these strikes, there's 2 Iskander M ballistics hit too. Now, as we have observed, and as Mr. Chris Cappy has observed as well, is there's this tactical battlefield use of Garands that, as we've seen those Garands increase in how many Russia has, they've gone from purely long-range sort of strategic sort of strikes to very frontline actions too. But I know there's someone who'll always get up me on here, and I believe he's actually correct, where he says the typical Garand is not a drone. If it's set, target, and forget, it's just a very slow cruise missile. A drone, to meet where's the threshold of a drone? And he says a drone needs to be steerable, camera, returnable, all of this, which we are seeing some of these drones get the update, but of course not all of them. But what we are seeing is these being used more in tandem with other traditional systems, such as Iskander. So you're seeing those systems, higher end, more likely to get through air defense, and then these doing other cleanups or distracting AD too. And layering your attack portfolio is very important also. But speaking of these Garands, which is an analog, was an analog of Iran's Shahed, but of course has gone into Russian manufacturing and has added bits and pieces of technology and whatever. It was bought the license of that system. But the Wall Street Journal has this: every nation wants to copy Iran's deadly Shahed drone. The US and its allies are racing to develop a copycat version of the low-cost, long-range weapon. And we have seen this in many nations, from Ukraine to the US. They are trying to build copies of this simple and cheap system. And there are very few weapons in this war that last more and effective for more than a few months. And the Shahed, the Garand, has been a staple of this war for a long time. Now, what I will say of the West, with all that I see in the defence industrial space, is instead of just making a copy, just a cheap tens of thousands of dollars worth copy, what we will do is we'll make a high-tech fucking super drone that'll cost a shitload of money. We'll pump $5 billion into some company that an ex-colonel now runs, who's the CEO of, and we'll produce 50 a year. Rather than the whole point of this system is just mass. Now, if people are saying Russia can produce up to 1,000 a day or soon could do that during wartime, I'd presume that China could make 10,000. I don't think that it is bold at all to say China has 10 times the industrial capacity of Russia, and for significantly cheaper also. So that's something we need to take into account if we ever see future actions too. So let's have a look at the maps. Of course, here's Ukraine, the center of the screen, the capital of Kyiv, the red areas, occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Where I want to come down, I actually want to come down into this front. This is the Huliopol area, Velika Novosilka. If you followed me for some time, you know that I've spent some time in and around Huliopol. And I want to speak a little bit on this because we are seeing a lot more actions in this direction. And the front line from here only sits 7.8 kilometers away. Now, Huliopol was more relevant in now the earlier days of the war. But from my time here, I was told that Russian forces were on the outskirts with some break-ins and that there was at least one tank on the inside of Huliopol. This was walking around with soldiers and people that lived there as well. The video is still on my channel, I believe. Now, what we have seen in the last days, we've seen an increase in reporting of the amount of artillery hitting in Huliopol, and we have seen a Fab 3000, which is actually very rare. Russian channels they make out like every Fab is a 3000. That is just absolutely not the case. It's actually fairly rare, but we did see a Fab 3000 land in this area. Now, what we can see is you can see Huliopol. You can see all the hub roads of Huliopol. Huliopol is also divided by a small waterway, but this small waterway, there's actually very few roads that go across it. It's a fucking pain in the ass when you're in Huliopol, and this was years ago as well. And it acted at the time, and it still acts as a frontline area, such as Orikhiv, for regional logistics and stabilization points also. So we have Huliopol here. You can see where the roads are heading out of here, and there's no other larger hubs really around it. You get down to Orikhiv, which is about 37 kilometers away. The waterway in here, you see a bridge here, that is a pain in the ass. It's basically a creek, but that does complicate things in this direction. So let's have a look. We see just in this direction, if you will call it around Berezovak, Alenivsky, the deep state is showing red check, which indicates movement in this direction. In my opinion, this is still well behind. Well, it's well behind the geolocations we have in here. As we can see, there's some areas of up to 20 kilometers of grey zone. But we do have a Suryak map in here. And this is around the Verbove area, which is where we see this movement. So you can have a look and say in this front, Huliopol front, in the last 2 days, Russian army captured serious positions along the border between Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia Oblast and entered the locality of Novohurovkia. So what we're looking at is Novohurovkia right here, of course, Dnipro, Zap, Oblast, and where this is then sitting. So right around this sector, we know there's definite movement in there. We spoke about this, I believe, at length yesterday. It's finally some Kool-Aid drinkers are starting to see, hey, this area is in free fall and there's not much fortification in this direction. Keep an eye on that. Now, let's move our way up into Pokrovsk, of course, where we have the Pokrovsk pocket and the Russian push out in here. That this is being basically ignored at the moment by deep state. I think that they are on lockdown to not speak about this at all. Now, Russian army made new advances then out to the northeast of here, southeast of Kushriv Yar and south of Ivanivka. On the other hand, Ukrainian army recaptured completely the locality of Nikhorovka. So this sits down in the base here. We've spoken a lot about this, and some Russian advance out in this area. Now, in my opinion, the one who is best tracking this overall is Mr. Thor Kill 65. Now, this map is maybe not the easiest in the world to see, but I'll show you because we just need to line up where we see these. I believe these are spoil pits for mines. We have Vilny, Novoshakovka area. So you can see where these pits are in here. You can line up where these are as well as Vilny, where then Azov is pushing, where Ukraine is sort of squeezing down on this, but out into Kushitiv Yar, and it doesn't show this amount of cutoff, but he's also showing significant advancement on the other side. So I'll just draw this in like rough, that he's showing it's more something like this, even sometimes less on the north than this map is showing, but that this side is showing more like this. And this road out to Druskivka is then having problems. And yes, Ukraine is pushing in on Nikhorovka and having success in here, even pushing in Mayak. But if the Russian forces on this side can really have this road under fire control or potential cutoff, that this whole gap in here may fall into something that looks like this, and that'll solve the problems that the Russian forces are having on the western side. So keep an eye on this, but also use many sources. As Mr. Thorkill said, he said, I think Zelensky is going to regret saying what he did about this, because he said it is deteriorating. Of course, we have the Konstantinivka pocket in here. This is greatly ignored, and greatly ignored on many, many maps, and the seriousness of this and the logistics in and out of here. But we have the double pocket where we have Katerinivka, Bivkina in here too. Suryak, he shows northern push up in here as well. That the Russian forces, they're advancing into the dashes in here, and Ukrainian army remnants are beginning to withdraw northwards. But you can see the problems in here. You've got by best case, and the deep state is always going to show the best case for Ukraine. You've got 900 meters here. That's nothing. And you've got here to here of 2.6 kilometers. That is nothing to move through to try and withdraw out of here. We already know a lot of logistics in here are supplied by drone, and we do know, because Azov had a recovery mission down this road of casualties too, that this is very, very dangerous. Let's push then into Seversk. We see red check on this map in Serebryanka region. Continue pushing, but of course reaching then the Donetsk River in here, but also the end stages of this forest that hasn't moved for, excuse me, some time. On the Seversk front here, we do see where Suryak is showing significantly different. So you can see where Serebryanka is. Now, just to give you an idea, he's showing that basically straight down from Serebryanka all the way down here, that this is under then control. And see where this push up is right in here to Rudnik, that he is showing this, sorry, map's glitching on me, that this push up in here, that this is happening. So he's showing more something like this is cut down in here, and that there is a push into here. Be very interesting to see if all of this was to come under control, how that would actually look. And like I said, there seems to be very much a softening up on the western outskirts of Seversk with FABs and artillery, because you've got to cross a lot of open ground before getting to there. I think the movement in this area concerns me more than anywhere else, just due to how stable this was for years, literally years. Now, I'd be silly if I didn't mention this, although I think this will be a great big nothing burger, but Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, he has ordered a rare, urgent meeting of hundreds of generals and admirals. The Pentagon has summoned military officials from across the world for a gathering in Virginia. Even top generals and their staffs don't know the reason for the meeting. And it says later in the article, both Trump and J.D. Vance downplayed its significance, with Trump asking, why is it such a big deal? Vance, appearing alongside Trump, said it's not particularly unusual that generals are speaking with Hegseth. I think it's odd you guys have made such a big story of it. And again, yeah, it's not rare for him to meet with generals, but meet with like everyone, that is rare, especially in one position. I tell you, if you're ever going to have a great state war, I know where you'd be dropping a bomb in a week. Like, yeah, the security risk of that is huge too. Now, there's rightfully a shitload of speculation all across then the left and right arc of what this actually is going to be. In my opinion, it's more likely that Hegseth and Trump is going to deliver some sort of anti-woke message than it is to have a declaration of war. The time will tell what this actually is. Now, we have fires at plants that are going to develop military equipment in Germany over the past years. We've got one in the UK today. We've seen a lot of that. We've seen drones flying all over Denmark. A lot of them are not military drones. A lot of it's just being over-reported, but we do know there was something in the air. We do hear about breaches potentially of airspace as well by Russian fighter jets, and Trump saying, shoot them down, Poland saying, we will do it. Again, we'll see it when we see it, if we actually do. Again, there's rhetoric and reality. But in my opinion, if a state of which you have deemed the enemy breaches your airspace, shoot the fucking thing down. That would be my message if a plane went over Australia. But again, it's very simple to say this. It gets far more difficult when you're dealing with then large, powerful states. If a Chinese jet flew into Australia, what are we really going to do unless it's dropping? Like, it's more difficult than the simplicity of just shoot it down. But I wouldn't be surprised if we did see missiles fired if MiG-31s do re-enter. But let's talk about this from an expert behind the scenes and then go a little bit deeper. And I can't thank him enough for all of his help. I get why people think Trump is volatile. It's strange to have someone in the West put their foot down and actually follow through. Bombing Iran was a decision made long before it happened. It was hardly a volatile decision. They wanted to do this and needed a way to do it. If we want to talk about volatile, Russia testing the Baltics is going to trigger NATO to go all in if they fuck it up. Russia is playing a dangerous game here. They are on 17 and they've said to the dealer, hit me. Poland, Germany, and Scandinavian nations all have to either fight or capitulate as a non-united front, and we'll see them lose the Baltic Sea piecemeal to Russian territorial expansion. And this is like the article we went through the other day about NATO hasn't ever really been tested and what really happens if there was like an invasion into Estonia. Is there going to be or is there not? It's either one or the other. You either have to fight all in or you capitulate, and that's going to end up with huge problems. All are being fucked with by Russia in grey zone operations and have now lost patience. Russia has pushed them as far back as they can go. If Russia slips and accidentally goes or deliberately goes kinetic, everyone knows they have to go all in. They don't want to, but they've backed into a corner now by Russia's actions. And the choices are clear. Poland, I believe on the 17th, this was, but shut down Chinese goods in transit. I believe this is $25 billion that's going to stop through Chinese goods in transit through Poland should be an early warning light for BRICS. Things have changed in the past week, and you can feel it here. I think Russia needs to think 5 or 10 years ahead to what kind of relationship they want with Europe. If they want a solid war, carry on doing what they're doing, but be wary because they have backed Europe into a corner now, and a cornered, frightened animal is guaranteed to bite and will fight for survival. And Russia doesn't have the capacity to deal with NATO on going all out. That is true. But at the end of the day, where's the willingness for this also? And could still lock into an attritional, incredibly costly war. Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, he seems to think so. If Russia wants to be open to more than BRICS economically, it needs to keep a door open to the West. I think it should, because Russia does not control BRICS. And if its control over the Federation is weakened enough, could see internal conflict as significant amounts of current combat veterans are from mining and timber resource-rich East. Most will go home to unemployment and talk of secession by some regions, which is already happening. We all know China will back whoever can guarantee them access to resources. It might be best for the government sitting in Western Russia to not cut its nose off to spite its face. And this is a very interesting perspective on the very similar but opposite to what we speak about the complete isolation of Russia by the US long term is unlikely due to China. But on the other side, Russia acts as a power balance between China, and it of itself doesn't want to become a vassal of just being a resource pit stop for China. That where you want walls up, or do you need to balance still somewhat, and that balance of sovereignty that we speak a lot about, those pillars of sovereignty. But we speak about grey zone operations, going all in, backed into a corner, all of this, and the alarm bells that ring in my head is not only stepping over the mark and calculating something wrong and something happening, but also false flags and the risk of false flags. And we're going to speak about when and why these can and do take place. But I want to talk about this first, the risk of false flags, and false flags do carry a large risk. These operations depend on deception. If uncovered, they can severely damage the credibility of the state that carried them out. Now, this is true, but there is far less risk to Ukraine and the Western states than to Russia conducting a false flag at the present. What Russia doesn't want is expansion of war and more countries entering. They're quite happy because they know if we can keep on this same straight and narrow that we are on at the moment, that we will win this war. But you don't know where things may change. But also, we speak about deception, uncovering, and the credibility. Ukraine, very likely with Western support, targeted the Nord Stream in a false flag operation with no one batting an eyelid. No one batted an eye. And there was other ones as well. And expanding the war for Ukraine does make sense. Absolutely, it does make sense to want to have other nations more involved, either in a kinetic action or more support, as we do see wavering support also. And what we do see is states, especially in Central and Western Europe, but also in Baltics too, states that have staked their ideological survival, that this war is ideologically existential for a lot of these states. They've staked this on Ukraine's victory. It also makes sense. So this is why I've said, we may not say it, but I think the risk of something like this is extremely, extremely high. So I'm just going to go through when and why, and you can add up in your head how many of these are ticked off, and if you've got a majority of them, it means that the risk is very, very high. When states use a false flag attack. Domestic unrest or instability. If a government faces serious dissent, political crises, or to unite the population or justify crackdowns. Now, I'm not meaning just Ukraine, I'm also meaning in other Western countries as well, but also overlay this as well with Russia or China or anyone. Okay, this is a basic overview, and you guys are far intelligent enough to add this to the situation of which you need. Military setbacks or crises. After defeats or failures, states may stage incidents to shift the blame of the enemy, to maintain morale, and keep public support for the war. A pretext for war, or casus belli, to provoke or to justify a war. The fabricated attacks can serve as the official justification to launch or expand a war under the guise of self-defense. Before elections or leadership transitions, or as far as if you get power vacuums, you can then rally nationalism, you can consolidate power in periods of political competition, and this goes into to unite and justify crackdowns too. When international sympathy shifts to the enemy, or there's just wavering sympathy to it, doesn't mean that it's shifted. It doesn't mean that people are going the other way. It just may mean it's reducing. If the adversary is gaining legitimacy or you're losing legitimacy, a stage incident can reverse the narrative, either portraying as an aggressor or as a further victim. During peace negotiations, a faction that benefits from prolonged conflict may create a false flag to derail talks or strengthen its bargaining position. And absolutely, there's a lot of argument about prolonging this war and who it benefits, who does it benefit. Now, the one who it doesn't benefit are the soldiers. It doesn't benefit Ukraine, but you can see prolonged more money does benefit America. But you also can see on the other side, with a larger population, a larger manufacturing base, and taking ground, that prolonging the conflict can make sense for Russia as well. Influencing alliances or foreign aid. Fabricated, staged pressure into providing military or diplomatic support. So I'm sure you're ticking these off in your head and you're seeing why this has been such a concern for me for some time. Why do states do this? So that's when, why? Creating that casus belli that we spoke about to justify our escalation by presenting the enemy as an aggressor, rallying both domestic and international support or existential survival within your state. To further rally this, manipulating public and media narratives to generate outrage, fear, or sympathy, shaping how events are perceived at home and abroad, swaying international opinion and allies, attract allies, secure aid, mobilise coalitions, or framing the adversary as a shared threat. I think that is an important part in what we are speaking about, especially when we're talking of Europe. Provoking or distracting enemies to bait opponents into missteps or divert their resources and attention to justify repression at home, to crack down on political opponents or minorities under the cover of national security. And this is why so many people doubt things like the Russia Gate, which you could put into an event like this, or against the Romanian should have been President Călin Georgescu or others, where If you're in Europe and you fall over and scuff your knee, that was Vladimir Putin's fault. It was an FSB operation with all this funding behind it and G at the top. Like, that's literally the argument of any of this, discrediting the enemy and shaping a global narrative to depict adversaries as irrational, barbaric, criminal, weakening their legitimacy. And this to shape that narrative as well, when we know actually on global affairs, when you look at the academics speak around this, there needs to be an assumption of actually rationality, although decisions made may be after the fact seen as irrational. Was it irrational at the time? And this is the biggest one we spoke about the other day, was the Germans' Operation Barbarossa, where it was rational at the time to believe, due to Stalin's purges, the thinning out of the Soviet military, that an attack with a blitzkrieg style attack could really make significant ground, which we did see in the early days. That was actually a rational decision. After the fact, it looks irrational, but then we've got everything at hand. Now, sowing discord among allies to fracture enemy coalitions or create mistrust between partners. So where there may be partnerships between, say, within NATO or within the global south, or the axis of upheaval, if you will, influencing post-war narratives. False evidence laid during conflict can later justify war crimes or shape historical accounts. And we're already seeing history being written as we're going and no one fucking questioning it. So that's just a quick overview, I guess, of when and why. And you can see where my concern is in this, because this can be an absolute slippery slope and we see much wider conflict. We, I believe, are actually probably at the most dangerous point of this war, of the whole thing. And you see these drones, you see these debris, you see this or that. Is it Russia dipping their toe in the water, threatening? Is it laying groundwork for something like this? Jesus, we don't know. Is Russia trying to drag Europe into in a prolonged conflict? Again, we do not know. Legends, look after yourself. With everything, time will tell. History will be written about this incorrectly. We know it will be, because no one questioned the narrative to the first 3.5 years. But we're going to try and do our very best. Legends, look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.